from glide path to the flare control autopilot. So it's a change from one autopilot to another. So generally the start of flare is around 50 feet above ground level, and then you start the flare manual. So like last class I told you, you cannot have a trajectory in which the vertical velocity is very high and you damage the undercarriage. So manually also the pilot tries to rotate the aircraft in such a way that the vertical component of the velocity reduces. So it's a smooth, so that you have a smooth landing. So you look at the flight path angle. Okay. So this is suppose this is a velocity vector. So here it is negative when it is on the glide path. Then the moment you hand over to the flare control, gradually you start rotating the aircraft. Okay, that is you're pitching up the aircraft, and finally during landing, it's positive. Okay, so from negative to positive, that's the sort of transition you have, and that reduces the vertical component of the velocity also. Okay. Now, if you look at the trajectory, what is required for this flare control, it's an exponential path. Okay, so it goes like this, and then smoothly lands on the runway. Uh, so, flare control starts from a height of around 50 feet. You change the flight path angle from a negative value of around -3 degrees to some positive value at touchdown. The vertical component W is initially around 10 feet per second, and finally you land up around 1 feet per second. So as we have already seen, the components of velocity, this is U, W is the horizontal component, and W, and this addition becomes the actual velocity vector. Okay. So as you touch down, this W approximately becomes 0, so that U and this velocity vector is as good as the horizontal component U. Okay. Now, what we really require is this exponential uh, flight path. Okay. So that can be any exponential flight path can be described by this equation, height h. So you start off with some initial height. In this case, it's around 50 feet. Then multiplied by this exponential, and this capital T is the time constant. So it is as good as describing any first order system. Okay, when you differentiate this equation once, so you have h dot is equal to minus h naught by t. The t comes from here, e exponential minus t by t. Okay. Now this whole green color thing is nothing but the first equation, which describes height. Okay. So you can replace this by h. So you have h dot is equal to minus h by t. So multiplying this side, you have h dot t plus h equal to 0. You give, instead of giving it as a 0, you give it as a small negative value. Otherwise, what happens is, if you are, so let us say this is the runway and this is the touchdown. If you're not giving this small negative value, when you start the flare, it will be a very long flare. Okay, it may just overshoot the runway also. We don't want such a long trajectory. So we give a small negative value so that it goes somewhat like this and touches down. This small negative value is taken from different flight tests which are carried out for different aircrafts. Okay, so with experience, they keep tweaking this value so that for a particular type of aircraft, this gives a good flare control. So this is a basic kinematics which is going. This in fact is going to be the control law which we are going to use. Uh, though it looks a bit complicated, so we start with this very small epsilon, a negative value, some controller, and which gives the desired pitch attitude. Uh, this pitch attitude control already we have seen in the autopilot, pitch how you control the pitch attitude. So you have theta desired and some controller which will deflect the elevators. The moment you deflect the elevators, the flight dynamics part takes over. And the net result is these variables alpha and theta will keep changing. And already we have seen in the previous height control autopilot that h is equal to u times difference of these two. So you get h dot, again integrated for a period of time, you'll get h. Now the most complicated thing in this flare control is this radio altimeter. Okay, it has to function really well, really accurate. You can't use normal barometric sensors, and so that you get the correct H value, and it should not be affected by any pressure difference on the field. Okay, so there is no question of using barometric pressure sensors. So it's radio altimeters only. Now you can use this control law. H is derived from the radio altimeter. Then you take the derivative multiplied by the time constant. Again, it will decide on be decided by the type of the aircraft. Then you have this summation, and this goes as h plus th dot is equal to hf. So that completes the control, feedback control. That's the outer loop. Inside loop already, inner loop we already seen. The moment flight dynamics blocks comes out, you can sense q and theta, and that in turn can go into the inner loop as a feedback. So you have this outer loop, which is the actual autopilot, which is going on for the flat control, and you have the inner loop, which is the flight dynamics. Sarup, are you getting it? How it is implemented? Few things are not there in the reference book, that's why I thought I'll just write down the equations. In fact, it is explained very well in Blake. So this is on the flare control. An extension of all this is called satellite guidance or ground-based augmentation system. Okay. Now this is basically a GPS-based system in which all these, incidentally, if you look at these, this block diagram, you will find multiple blocks. Okay, what it means is for redundancy, they would have added a triple redundancy or quadruple redundancy. So they don't trust on just one controller or one sensor. Okay, so that's why it's shown as 4 blocks. Now, it's all based on GPS. A traditional instrument landing system, say, let us say this is a touchdown, it will have one, I'm looking from top, okay, so it will have just one approach. So what they do is, it's like a token system, aircrafts are put on hold, so they keep flying in circles, okay, it's called a holding pattern. At different altitudes, they keep, the controller will ensure that they are in holding pattern, and one by one he'll allow the aircraft to come and land. That definitely is not a very economical way of operating things. So they said, why not have multiple approaches? But multiple approaches means multiple instrument landing system. Even maintaining one ILS itself is a very expensive affair. So they said, we'll use something which is almost free, like GPS, to do the same job. Okay. So they said, okay, let's have we want a system in which instead of just one approach, we can have multiple approaches. Okay. And it has to be done using GPS. Uh, Now, Sarup, any suggestions how it can be implemented? Are you getting the point? What it is expected to do?
No, sir.
See, ILS will have just one approach. Agree? Because see, ILS is nothing but two beams, right? What we have seen already. The localize. I am talking about azimuth. So let us say this is touchdown. So you have these two beams coming, and if you are aligning yourself at the center of these two beams, so you can land along the center line of the runway. So which essentially means that there is only one approach. Uh, are you getting it, Saru?
Yes, sir.
Because these beams are fixed beams, okay? It's not that they are not steerable beams. You can't say that beam is like this. And next moment you change the beam and then bring it here. Okay, that's what, in fact, MLS tried to do, but it was a big failure. They tried to generate multiple beams. So you don't want one beam, okay? One approach, sorry. So now the physical limitation is there are many aircrafts approaching the airport. You can't keep asking them to come one after another. It's quite risky. Okay? In close proximity, there must be some separation. So you put them on holding pattern. This probably people who are flying, even whenever you approach some busy airports, you will find that the aircraft going around in lazy circles. Okay, it's nothing but they're waiting for the ILS approach. To be clear, so this is the present system. Okay, but now they want to use multiple approaches so that it becomes slightly more economical. Now the question is, how do we do it with GPS? It's open to the class. Sahana, any suggestions?
Sir.
Anything you can think of, like how to use GPS to do this, to generate multiple approaches or to achieve multiple approaches?
Not yet, sir. Let me think.
Yeah.
So we can have multiple touchdown points.
No, multiple touchdown means multiple runways. Isn't it? It's too expensive. And you can't, no, because the prevailing wind direction. So it has to be opposite to it. So civilian airfields, they have just one runway. Whereas defense airfields, there is always two runways. Almost perpendicular to each other. Because even if the main runway is bombed, you can use the short runway. But civilian runways are all just one single runway. And even if it is there, it will be somewhat parallel to it. Very big airports have one short runway also for emergencies. Okay, the solution is quite simple. Okay, uh, for a particular airport, you define the approach paths, whatever is convenient to you. Okay, so this approach paths are nothing but synthetically generated. Okay, so you just continuously give coordinates, lat long coordinates. Say the approach path 1, every 10 meters you give what should be the lat long. Okay, that's all. That's the only information you are giving it to the aircraft. You're telling that okay, you are clear to land on approach 1, and the approach 1 indicates consists of so many lat long points. Okay. So now inside the aircraft is just getting lat long information from the GPS. Okay, and then keeps comparing it with the required lat long. Okay. And now this is just nothing but a heading control autopilot. Okay. Only thing is, instead of an ILS beam as a reference, you are having lat long as a reference. So you keep changing it, okay, changing the approach of the aircraft till the time you align yourself with the required approach. So approach need not be just a straight line along the center line of the aircraft. It can be any path. Okay, suppose there is a hillock over here. This fellow can even define an approach path like this. You circumvent the hillock and then land. Only thing is now you are just giving the lat long coordinate continuously, okay, and it's just a fixed information. You are not changing it every time. For a particular airfield, you just give a particular approach path, and approach path consists of number of lat longs. So you just keep comparing it with the GPS system, lat long, and then apply corrections to the aircraft flight path. Are you getting it, Salu?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, what do you think will be the disadvantage, or what do you think will be the limitation of the whole system.
So we should make sure two planes won't land at the same time.
Yeah, that the controller will ensure. Okay, he'll give, assuming he gives sufficient separation. Apart from that, from the equipment, apart from the human error, the equipment side, what do you think is going to be the problem?
So the information meant for one flight the information meant for the first flight might be misunderstood by the second one.
No, you tell them, no, like, okay, your first flight should come on approach alpha, and second flight should come on some delta. And it's a digital communication system. Always you can encode the approach paths also, telling that this particular thing is only for a particular approach. Anyone else in the class? Okay. The whole system will work only if the GPS is accurate. And GPS can always give an error of around 30 meters, right? So you get into 30 meters for approach is what, 30, 390 feet on either side. That's going to be really dicey. So everything depends on the accuracy of the GPS. And GPS is, after all, coming, the signals are coming through the atmosphere. There can be so much of losses or other things which will create error, okay, in the signal. So you can't avoid this 30 meters, okay, on as a rough estimate. So how do we get over this problem? But you have to use GPS only. Okay. For that, what you do is use the differential GPS. I don't know whether people remember it or not. So this ground station has a GPS. Now, this is also going to get some erroneous information, no issues. But this is a pre-surveyed ground position. Right? So if it is Coimbatore, you know it is 73 degrees east and 11 degrees north. Okay, so that is not going to change. So it compares the received GPS signal with the surveyed actual lat long position. So now that error is also broadcast to all aircraft. And the easiest way to broadcast is you broadcast this information on the NDB. Okay, so it keeps this aircraft keeps receiving this error information also. So when they are trying to implement this autopilot, they'll ensure that this error is also taken into account. So it's as good as 100% accurate GPS. So that's how you achieve this sort of critical maneuvers using GPS. Is it okay, Swaroop? Are you getting it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Firstly, the system should be extremely accurate. You are talking about a landing aid, okay? It's not a navigation aid. GPS as such is not accurate enough. So only way you can do it is you compare the GPS information with the known information, and whatever error is there, keep transmitting some continuously. And already we are having a NDB which is omnidirectional. So you just code this information and pass it on to the aircraft. Then it is the problem of the aircraft control system to add all those errors. Otherwise, it's essentially a heading control autopilot. Okay. Yeah, that's all on the autopilot system. Maybe I'll try to show you few next class on one or two autopilot designs. You might not fully appreciate it because you're not done flight dynamics, but still, let me see how simple I can make it. Okay, so we'll meet in the next class. Okay, and almost the syllabus is over. Only flight management system is left. So I'll try to show you some design aspects of some autopilot, a simple autopilot, like maybe altitude autopilot.